26th July is celebrated as Vijay Divas to mark our victory over Pakistani intruders in Kargil in the year 1999. And while we all know the role played by the army, very little is known about the role played by the Indian Air Force, which was actually the game changer in the entire Kargil operations, which was codenamed as Operation Safed Sagar. And one of the participants in that Operation Safed Sagar involving the Air Force is with us, Group Captain Ashwini Bhaku, who was responsible for capturing the positions of the enemy over the heights of Kargil, which was which had become a nemesis for Indian Army, considering that they could target our logistics, our troop movement, and the highway accurately and disrupt our movement, and also inflict heavy casualties. And it was this images that was captured by Group Captain Ashwini Bhaku from air at a very high speed, avoiding the enemy surface to air missiles, that helped the armed forces, the generals, to come out with a proper plan to target the Pakistani intruders who were occupying the heights, who were actually taken up our posts. To share with us the experience of not only his own experience of capturing those images of Pakistani intruders who were targeting his aircraft with SAMs, but also the overall role played by the Air Force and the future ahead in terms of the changing nature of warfare today. So welcome, Group Captain Bakusa, to this session of Uncovering India. We would like you to say a few words to our audience.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this episode. The Indian Air Force basically was involved in two parts. One is in photo recce missions, in which my unit was involved in the photo recce missions, and we were supplying that intelligence to the army. And the second portion was carrying out attacks over the hills, where a large part of the Indian Air Force was involved. I will cover a lot of this as we go ahead. But right in the beginning, I wanted to clarify that these are the two roles that we were doing. Right now, before we go any further, let me just set the mood for this, and I would like to share the screen, and I would like to play a small song which actually epitomizes this entire Kargil operation. Sorry, there has been some issue there. Let me start again.
मेरी मिट्टी की संतानों, कारगिल के वीर जवानों, मेरी आन के लिए, मेरी शान के लिए तूने हंस के दे दी अपनी जान। तुझे भूलेगा ना तेरा हिंदुस्तान, तुझे भूलेगा ना तेरा हिंदुस्तान, तुझे भूलेगा ना तेरा हिंदुस्तान, तुझे भूलेगा ना तेरा हिंदुस्तान। बर्फीली उन चट्टानों पे तू शोला बन के लड़ता रहा, जिस्मों के जख्म नहीं देखे बस आगे बढ़ता रहा। दुश्मन का हौसला चूर किया, उन्हें हारने पे मजबूर किया। जब गोली लगी तेरे सीने पे तब ठहर गई मेरी सांसें। जब तूने मुझे अलविदा कहा तो बरस पड़ी मेरी आंखें। सूरज की तरह ताबिंदा है तू, मर के भी तो जिंदा है। मेरे खेतों में खलिहानों में तू लहराए, मेरी फसलों में तेरी ही झलक दिखे मुझको, मेरी आने वाली नस्लों में। उसका पूरा हक अदा किया। कुर्बानी किसको कहते हैं सारी दुनिया को बता दिया। हर हिंदुस्तानी कहता है तू उसके लहू में बहता है। तेरे माता पिता बीवी बच्चे रहते हैं मेरी पनाहों में, कभी आँच नहीं आने दूंगा, कभी आँच नहीं आने दूंगा। रखूंगा उन्हें निगाहों में, मेरी आन के लिए, मेरी शान के लिए तूने हंस के दे दी अपनी जान। तुझे भूलेगा ना तेरा हिंदुस्तान, 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 तेरा हिंदुस्तान, तेरा हिंदुस्तान, तेरा हिंदुस्तान।
This is a story which was played out between May and July 1999. And the emotion that ran through at that time was that I only regret that I have but one life to lay down for the country. The Kargil War for the Air Force, Army, and the Navy had different names. It was Operational Vijay for the Indian Army, Operation Safed Sagar for the Indian Air Force, and Operation Talwar for the Indian Navy. It happened between 3rd May to 26th of July 1999. This is the war that upheld the pride of the nation, the war that showed the world that we will not tolerate infiltration. If you look at the map on the left, we are talking about the red portion, which is the northern portion of India, Jammu and Kashmir region. If you look at on the left hand side here, where my pointer is, it indicates the line of control, marked with these small red dots. Kargil is where here, right in the center here. We have Srinagar here at the bottom on the left, and we have Leh on the right. The operations took place between Dras, Kargil, and Batalik. It was in this sector that this entire operation had taken place. The area here is about 15 to 18,000 feet. You notice the sharpness of the hills, the near vertical climbs that our soldiers had to do to reach the top and capture these peaks. It is on these peaks that the enemy was stationed. Sheer hillsides, towering to about 18,000 feet, snow covered. While climbing, the army, the soldiers had to hang on these through ropes for long, long periods to reach their summit. And then, after reaching on top, they had to tackle the enemy. The blue line which you see on this little map here, that is the National Highway 1. An extremely important highway as far as India is concerned, because this is the one road that connects Jammu, Srinagar through Dras and Kargil to Leh. If you notice also this dotted line is the line of actual control, and the actual ground position is marked here northward through the Siachen Pass. Now the build-up here in Kargil started a long time earlier than actual operations started. On 6th of May, the Army Patrol notices 9 to 10 infiltrators east of Batalik area. On May 7th, there's heavy shelling by Pakistan artillery fire on Indian patrol. On May 8th, clashes happen between the troops and infiltrators. And on 9 again, a heavy Pakistan shelling happens, which destroys the ammo dump at Kargil. 10 to 14th, more infiltrators were noticed in Dras, Kaskar, and the Mashko Valley. And then from 14th May onwards, the flushing out operation started. If you see the yellow portions on the top towards the top of the slide, you will see the number of infiltrators which were waiting across the line of control to be able to enter and create more chaos on our side. Notice also between Dras and Kargil how close the line of control is towards the national highway. And that is why anybody sitting on top of those hills on the line of control could very easily target any movement which was on National Highway 1. And that is what their aim was. The aim was to cut off the national highway so that the entire area of Batalik and Leh and the Siachen area would get isolated. With this is when they carried out the attack. Going further with the story, the Indian Air Force came into the play around 21st of May 1999. First time it was asked for to carry out a recce, a photo recce. One of our very old aircraft, a very old warhorse actually, which had taken extensive part in the 1971 operations, the Canberra, had now been fitted with a lot of photographic equipment. And they were doing the photo recce role. The Canberras were asked to carry out a task of photo recce along the line of actual control to see what is happening and where the enemy is positioned. Squadron Leader Perumal and Squadron Leader Jha, these were the two pilots who flew this mission on 21st of May 1999. While they were flying this mission, they noticed a lot of build-up in Batalik area, the red area which is put into a circle. That is the area where they saw a lot of build-up taking place. So when they noticed this, they were circling around there to try and pick up more intelligence so that that could be passed to the army. And then the army would take its appropriate action against that buildup. While doing so, they were fired upon. And a shoulder-fired missile, a heat-seeking missile, was launched towards their aircraft. They got hit, but with their expertise, with their experience behind them, and the Canberra being a strong aircraft, they somehow managed to stay within the valley and come back and land at Srinagar. Now, this turn of events was extremely unexpected. Nobody was sure. No, when we talk about infiltrators, we are not talking about them carrying shoulder-fired missiles. But this is what happened. On the same day, my unit, the Fighting 14, was tasked. We were tasked to carry out photo recce. I was commanding a unit of Jaguars. The Jaguar aircraft had two roles during that time. My unit had two roles during the time. We were part of the photo recce missions, and we were also supposed to do bombing, deep strike into enemy territory. However, during Kargil operations, the role given to us was the photo recce role, wherein we could supply intelligence to our forces, and then they would plan and accordingly launch their operations. Now, on 22nd of May is when we flew this mission. We planned for it, and all during the day we kept getting intelligence about what was happening. We also started getting intelligence that there were enemy aircraft moving into some airfields in that particular area, especially Skardu, and that they were not going to allow us to fly in that particular area, and they would have attacked us, and then we would not have been able to do our task. So accordingly, with our coordination with our headquarters, we got escorts with MiG-29s who operated from the valley, and they escorted us for our mission on 22nd of May. The mission looked something like this. We took off from deep within our own territory. We flew straight upwards towards Srinagar initially, and then turned right. Now, obviously, our mandate was to stay within our own border. We were not permitted to go into the other territory or cross the LOC. It was at Srinagar that we picked up two of our escorts, the MiG-29s, and they came along with us to cover us so that from Skardu, which is here in the north, nobody could actually interfere in the mission that we were carrying out. We flew the mission, turned around and headed back towards our base, and on that date, we picked up 35 different places, 35 different build-ups, all along from the Dras up to Batali. We passed this information on to our headquarters, and from the headquarters, this information was then transmitted to the appropriate authorities, and from there, it was then on 25th of May that the Cabinet Committee on Security authorized the Indian Air Force to mount attacks on the infiltrators, but without crossing the LOC. It is at this time that the Air Force truly joined the battle as far as Kargil was concerned, and Operation Safed Sagar started. Now, after this, the Air Force flew a lot of missions with MiG-21 aircrafts carrying out strikes on various places, along with in coordination with the Army. We had the Mirage 2000s who were carrying out area patrols and creating air superiority so that local air superiority so that the Army could continue to operate. Subsequently, at a later stage, the Mirage 2000s also used smart bombs on particular targets. We had the MiG-29s who were operating in that area to ensure that no enemy aircraft could come in. The Jaguars operated, my unit operated basically to carry out intelligence gathering, photo recce missions, and carrying out assessment of all the damage which had been done so that we could further plan, or the Army could further plan its operations. The Air Force could also look at what damage they were causing. That is how the operations continued. The helicopters played a very, very major role because they were also inducted in to attack some of the targets which were in the hilly area. The Mi-17s did a tremendous job in carrying out any operations in that particular area. This story is not about the machines that we use. It is about the men. The men which led the most heroic battle with their troops. They showed the trespassers what defeat was. I would definitely like to mention here that a large number of those heroes and those people who fought on at these icy heights of 18,000 feet, where even breathing is very, very difficult, were young men, very, very young men. Some of them just about 19 years old. Some of the officers who were just passed out of the Indian Military Academy. But let me tell you that those men actually created such an environment that the enemy had to go back. They laid down their life in fighting for their nation. They sacrificed themselves so that we all could breathe and live. And this is again the sort of, if I would say, the feeling that prevailed. If I die in a war zone, box me up and send me home. Put my medals on my chest. Tell my mom that I did the best. 527 brave men laid down their life so that we can live in peace. More than 1367 were grievously injured. And many, many more families and men were affected. That, in short, is what the Kargil War was. The Air Force, like I said, operated a tremendous number of sorties using MiG-29s, using the Mirage 2000s, using the Jaguars, the helicopters, even for communication. And they operated in support of the army so that the army could do what they are supposed to do or what they are very well trained to do, and that is take back the land which was being threatened, take back the post which had been infiltrated and captured during the along the LOC. With that, I finished this small presentation. It was obviously a glorious victory for India. July 26, 1999 will go down in the annals of Indian history as a day when the determined Indian forces achieved a glorious victory over the Pakistani army. Over to you, back to you.
Thank you, sir, for this wonderful insight into the Battle of Kargil. In the process of the war, Air Force also suffered casualties, losses, and yet the Air Force kept on relentlessly pounding the heights of the Kargil. It was perhaps the first time that we had seen Air Force operating in such a major way in high altitude areas. How do you think that changed the entire role of Air Force as far as its terrain operability is concerned?
You are very right. This was the first time that the Indian Air Force has operated at such heights. We earlier only had our transport aircraft and helicopters who were operating at Leh, who were supporting the army there. But fighter aircraft had not operated, and especially not operated in a hostile manner at such heights. So during this process, when this happened, we obviously had to rethink and retrain. But the Air Force is a very coordinated, well-trained service, and we could adapt very easily at this time to these new conditions that we had to operate over or in. Obviously, because of that, there were certain limitations which were there on us. Aircraft operating from 25,000 feet, bombing targets at 18,000 feet. This is rarefied air. The control of the aircraft is difficult at these heights. But like I said, we adapted, we trained, and it's also forced us then that subsequently we have to change our training patterns and include all this also within what our training is and in our operational philosophy. This was also a lesson for the Indian Air Force to train in operating at such altitudes.
One of the best examples of adaptability was perhaps converting Mi-17 helicopters, transport helicopters, into fighter choppers, because the available fighter choppers couldn't fly at the height, 18,000 feet height, and the Mi-17 helicopters could fly at that height, and they had been converted into fighter choppers to take on the enemy. So is that a great example of adaptability of the Air Force at the height of a ongoing battle?
Yes, when you say that, I totally take your point, but I must add there that this had never been thought out, and that is the flexibility of the Indian Air Force, the flexibility and adaptability of the Indian Air Force, that we can convert at very, very short notice. The helicopter pilots, to a certain extent, were trained with weapons, but they had also never operated with weapons at such height. They were trained in the plain areas with weapons. The Mi-17s were trained in plain area. But again, to operate in this environment, and especially understand that when the helicopters operate in this environment, they are very, very vulnerable, because the enemy is sitting on the peaks and the enemy can see the helicopters coming from a long distance. So the enemy is prepared, but our helicopters, the crews, they didn't go back. They fought, they moved forward, and they attacked the targets that they were supposed to, and they did whatever it was possible to make sure that the enemy could move forward. Yes, adaptability and agility is part of the Air Force.
So, what are your quick memories of the battle? You were involved in the photo reconnaissance of the enemy positions, and you were also flying at a very low height, and but at a very high speed. What kind of adaptability had you had to undergo? Because Jaguars are not known for reconnaissance; they are more into fighter aircrafts. How do you convert them into reconnaissance? What kind of equipment were fitted, and how did that alter the way the battle was proceeding?
Jaguars, yes, Jaguars, when they were inducted in as deep penetration strike aircraft. But over the years, when the Canberras were being phased out, we had squadrons of the MiG-21s who were doing photo recce. Then it was a need was felt that when we are doing deep penetration strike, there are some aircraft which are also necessary to go along with or into the enemy territory to assess the bomb damage that had been created. And that's why, even actually before Kargil, the thought process had started, and in fact, the training and everything had started. We had got some special pods which were fitted onto the aircraft. A few aircraft were converted to do the photo recce role. But this was a part role which was given to us at that time. Our main role continued to remain to be deep penetration strike. So now, when we were told or we were tasked to do this part role, our orientation, our thinking, we had already trained to this to some extent, but we had not trained to go into high areas at low levels in this. We were operating in Leh, we were operating in other areas, as Jaguars, and Jaguars are known to fly low, fly at about 200 feet, fly at about 1,000 kilometers per hour. But now, when you go in to an area which itself is 18,000 feet, and now you're flying in that area, even if you're flying low, the capability of the aircraft reduces drastically because of the rarefied air. So the maneuverability reduces, capability reduces. We adapted to the photo recce role. Jaguars were later also even used in smart bombing, in targeted bombing. Though not my unit. My unit was not used for that role. The others were used for that role. It was difficult, but we continued to adapt. I must say that during this entire operation, research and development continued in behind the scenes. How to bomb from high altitude? What are going to be the repercussions? How to plan this? And that continued with the Air Force. We continued to adapt this. It was passed on to the front line to us. We operated. Even during the operation, when we noticed that there was a large activity for shoulder fired missiles and things like that, we sometimes even changed our heights to higher heights to avoid the shoulder-fired missiles being fired at us. Now, when you change the height, the effectiveness of the camera is also reduced to a certain extent. But we were using these tactics so that obviously we had minimum casualties, and so that the aircraft were not hit, but we were still able to do the task. Adaptability, flexibility carried out throughout the time, and like the Indian Air Force, the Jag was also adapted.
So, what were the key lessons that we learned from this entire operation as far as the Air Force is concerned? Its various roles are concerned, the terrain is concerned. So, what all changes have happened in the way Air Force operations are being planned in these 21 years, 22 years?
Well, I can only say one thing. The Air Force took a lot of lessons away from here. We understood, that operations in this area have to be done. We started thinking about aircraft which were multi-role aircraft. We started thinking about aircraft which could operate even at these heights very, very effectively. We started thinking of new weapons, smart weapons, because here you need smart weapons to target small pinpoint targets. Here, area weapons may not work. So the Air Force started thinking about that. The aircraft modified its training syllabuses. More emphasis was now put on operating at such heights with different types of weapons. So over the years after the Kargil war, the Air Force has adapted and also developed into a service which now operating in these areas will become as normal as anything else. Newer aircraft are coming in, the Rafales have come in, the Mirages are there, the the Su-30s are there. All these aircraft are now, it is easier for us to operate on those areas because they are multi-role aircraft and they are capable of operating at these heights. We've also got smart weapons into the services. Accordingly, training has to be was molded to make sure that we. So a lot of lessons we took from there. We took lessons about how helicopters were also vulnerable in that area, and the Air Force always wanted to is a service which likes to go deep into the enemy territory. Here we were bound to make sure that we stayed within our own territory and we carried out operations within our own territory. So we adapted to that also. And this again has been added to our training, how to restrain yourself within a set number of parameters when you are in support of the ground forces. A lot of adaptation, lot of training, lot of new aircraft, lot of weapons. All this has been part of the plan. And I think, in my opinion, though I am presently now not in the Indian Air Force, my thinking at present is the Indian Air Force continues to be a very potent and competent arm as far as the defense services in the country is concerned.
So, talking about the current scenario as far as the Indian operational planning preparedness is concerned, we have the CDS in place, which is supposed to be the main coordinating source for all the three arms when it comes to a operation involving the tri-services. But here again, we see some sort of a friction happening, news emerging that the CDS Chief of Defense Staff wants theaterization of commands. The Air Force is not very keen. Air Chief is not very keen. And then the CDS makes a remark that Air Force is a supportive arm, and that is also taken objection by the Air Chief. Do you think we have still yet not recognized the complete role or the value of the Air Force?
This is a difficult question to answer. See, theaterization started very long back, even in World War One, and it actually came into being in World War Two. Now, if you think about World War II, when we are talking about theaters, that time theaters became necessary because we had, let us say, the European theater, where all the forces had to be put under a single commander when those forces were from different nations. And obviously, they were different armed, but also from different nations. Then you had the Mediterranean, you had the Middle East and the North African theater, you had the Pacific theater. Now, if you notice, if you think about all these are very large, very, very large areas which had to operate with all three services and also armies from different nations. Now, when we talk about theaterization as far as India is concerned, India is not going to be a country which is going to go outside the Indian territory to gather or to gain territory. That is not our philosophy. Our philosophy is defend our nation to make sure that nobody can come into our nation and we are capable of defending and projecting our nation's power in case it is necessary if somebody attacks us. Is theaterization necessary? A lot of studies have been carried out on this. Even when the CDS came in, he ordered a lot of studies. Now, theaterization is basically trying to make sure that any theater commander, whoever it may be, whether the theater commander be in the northern sides or on the eastern side, a theater commander has certain forces at his disposal to be able to complete his mission. A very, very nice concept so that coordination and combination can take place. The chief, when you mentioned that the chief was not in favor, actually the air chief is, he mentioned very clearly that there is no sort of a any feeling about against theaterization, but things have to be worked out. And why we say things have to be worked out? Because of the limited resources that are available with India. The Indian Air Force has very limited number of units, and the Air Force is required to do two roles. One, they are supposed to make sure that they go deep into the enemy and incapacitate the enemy so that the enemy cannot launch or mount attacks on our territory and create air superiority. Now, this may not be total air superiority, this may be local air superiority as and when it is required. But this itself is in support of the army or our ground forces for that matter. Now, the second role also is support of the army when they are moving forward. That is what we call as close air support. So, there are these two roles. It is just the understanding of these two roles. When the CDS mentioned that the Air Force was a support arm, possibly he was mentioning to the Air Force about the second part of the role where we are supposed to do close air support. Now, a person like the CDS who has risen to this position, he is, I mean, we must not question the competence of the CDS. He has been the head of the Indian Army, and he is now the Chief of Defense Service. The CDS in that position. With due regard to him, I think he understands, and maybe when he projected this, he was only referring to part two, and he was not referring to part one. When the air chief mentioned this, that the Air Force has other roles, the air chief was possibly mentioning to the first role also being understood and agreed to. So theaterization as recommended by the Kargil committee is there. There is no resistance. If it is going to improve the defense of the country, why not? It necessarily means that we need to discuss, we need to make a threadbare, find out and work out the nitty gritties, how the forces are going to move, what sort of command, what sort of theaters are likely to be created, and then move forward rather than move forward in a hurry. Moving forward in a hurry, we may reduce the competency. And that is the only fear. But there is no resistance per se. Unfortunately, these brushes took place in public domain. Truly speaking, I am very certain that the people at the top, the three chiefs and the CDS, are competent enough to sit down, discuss, carry out studies, and then accordingly move forward. Some friction will be there because everybody likes to control or have power over their own organization, and they don't want to give anything. So some mindset changes are required, but I don't think that we should worry about this. I think the people on the top are competent enough to sort it out. They will think about the nation first, and they will come up with a solution. I know very well that the air chief is an extremely competent person, as are the army and the naval chief, and similarly the CDS. So don't worry about it. They will find a way, and they will make sure that the defense of the nation is strengthened. I am not worried about it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your valuable inputs. Before we conclude, I would request you to tell our audience, so what do you think, where is the role of Air Force going to head? Because more and more we are seeing that scope for full-scale war could be lesser, and limited theater-based battles like we saw in Kargil, or possible flare-up that could have happened in Galwan when the heights had conflict friction last year. Could is Air Force now looking at a more very limited and exclusive operational areas, or we are still expecting a full-fledged conflict involvement of Air Force?
See, the Air Force will continue to remain for years and years to come. It will continue to remain as part of the defense forces. The outlook or maybe even the equipment in the Air Force may change. Now, obviously, a lot of things are happening where drones are coming in, where other things are coming in. The Air Force's role will get modified depending on the situation on the ground. Are we thinking of a full-fledged war? Are we looking at our neighbors and saying that we are likely to have a full-fledged war? Nobody can say this. Nobody can predict this. So we need to be prepared for both contingencies, a full-scale war erupting, or even if small incidents happen like the Galwan or any such thing. If it was to be an incident like Galwan, the forces still have to be moved. Air superiority still has to be established over the area so that the ground forces can operate peacefully, doing what they are supposed to do. That means put the foot on the ground. Ultimately, it is that foot on the ground which has to be there. So Air Force in that respect will have to continue to support the ground forces, will have to create air superiority in whichever manner. If that air superiority has to be created by going into enemy territory and hitting some of those airfields and some of those installations, that will need to be done. Now, with the induction of more aerial vehicles, whether it be drones or anything else, or unmanned, aerial vehicles which may come in into the future, some roles will change. But war fighting presently will continue to have the thought that air superiority is needed, support to the ground forces is needed, whether by helicopters, by fixed wing aircraft, or any other means, even by drones. And we need to continue to evolve as we move forward. We cannot keep our thinking of the last 40, 50, 60 years. Today, cyber warfare, biological warfare, all the energy warfares are all very much going to be there. Now, why does a country really need to attack me with their air force when with cyber warfare they can incapacitate me, they can incapacitate my cities, my financial institutions, or anything else? So the entire gamut of warfare is changing, and it is going to continue to evolve.
We
All
are
the
now
three
talking
services, whether it
we are
is the Navy,
now talking about space command also. Now, outer space warfare is also we are
yes,
thinking.
yes, we have to think about it because now the entire gamut has changed. Now we have space available also, so there will be a space command, and that is aerials using it. We might even have energy weapons in the future placed in space, which could be directed towards specific targets. So continuous evolution will take place, and we must be agile and adaptable to be able to take that in our stride. Now, please understand also that we are a developing country. Being a developing country, finance is always going to be a constraint. So while I may want the best aircraft, the best weapons, and everything, uh, it may really not be possible for the best of everything to come in. So therefore, again, in that respect, we will have to adapt. You know, if we continue to pump in, I am from the Indian Air Force. I would love to get the best aircraft and the best weapons, and say that okay, then I can be more competent. But there has to be pragmatism. The country has to develop, and I am sure, again, I am fully confident that the powers that be who are there in the headquarters will project to the government what is required, and the government, in their pragmatic view, will take a decision on what is necessary for the nation. A balance will be created. So while the nation, the concept of war may change, our DRDOs are efficient enough. The drone attacks which took place, we already were thinking about anti-drone systems. We have already placed now anti-drone systems at some of the vital installations in the north. Their effectiveness will be judged, modifications will be done, and once again, we will make sure that none of these things ever happen again. Some things will come in through, they can never be 100% security. But like I said, let us stay confident about the nation, let us stay confident about the leadership. And I am sure with the adaptability we have, we will be able to make sure that the country continues to stay defended and we in the country can prosper.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your valuable inputs and your thoughts. And thank you again for taking time out from your busy schedule to share your experiences and explain the overall future of combat as far as the role of Air Force is concerned. Thank you very much, sir, and wish you all the very best for your future endeavors.
Thank you, Shashwat. Thank you for having me on this show. And I really wish you also and all the viewers all the very best. Thank you and Jai Hind.